Good morning. Welcome to episode 118 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the construction, the drilling, the water, and geothermal industry. Let's face it, if you're a contractor, an engineer, a regulator, a homeowner, we all need to be talking about these topics that are related to groundwater and the environment. This week's episode is brought to you by Center Rock Drilling Tools and Services. Thank you, Center Rock Incorporated. Center Rock manufactures a full line of air rock drilling tools and accessories, including down the hole hammers and bits from 3.5 inch to 48 inch, overburden drilling systems, and LP canister drills from 18 inch to 144 inch. They also offer mobile workshops and custom manufactured drill strings, all supported by their factory service team and technicians. I love Center Rock's motto. We make rocks disappear. That is great. I'm your host, Brock Yorty. This week, we're going to continue the discussion on the impacts of the Supreme Court's decision of the Chevron doctrine and the Chevron deference. What we need to understand right now is these regulatory agencies, known as the executive branch agencies, are very integral in what our industry, the construction industry, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, EPA, OSHA, Department of Interior. There's so many pieces here that have helped with regulatory rules. So we're going to start by outlining the rulemaking process that OSHA uses to help continue to make us safe. These rules that are written in blood that the Supreme Court has slowly started dismantling with the Chevron doctrine. Our feature this week, we will continue the discussion on waters of the United States and the impact of the Chevron deference, wrapping up with Texas versus New Mexico, because I believe we need to dig a little bit deeper into that discussion on groundwater. We got a busy episode this week. Let's jump right into safety. For this week in safety, I believe it's important for us to understand executive branch rulemaking authority, such as OSHA. The rulemaking process, as you can go to OSHA.gov and read about, the newest one we have is the new heat rule. That's right. I'm talking about heat again, because it is our most dangerous yet identifiable hazard that we can mitigate risk. So the rulemaking process that's happening right now, as it has happened many times over the decades of OSHA, it starts with the pre-rule, where OSHA collects and analyzes information on safety and health hazards to determine if a rule is needed. Last year, we saw states like Florida and Texas deregulate heat rules on a state level, empowering employers to determine when it's too hot and dangerous to work. OSHA, on the other hand, reaches out to its professionals in the field and gives notice to mitigate risk. And that starts with them creating a rule and request for public comment. These comments help OSHA develop the rule. Executive branch agencies creating rules are based on facts that something bad has happened. I want you to consider our company's near-miss reporting policy. OSHA doesn't often get the opportunity to create rules based off of near-miss reporting. It's based on someone not coming home to their families. So as the rulemaking process has started, there are multiple opportunities for engagement. There are advisory committees, stakeholder meetings. You can also submit comments in writing. To that fact, you can write to OSHA and ask for clarification on a rule, and they will respond and take that consideration. Those inquiries and responses can be found online, and it can help you in many different situations when it comes to a rule being right or not right for the job. In drilling, we have that happen quite often, right? We fall in between general industry and construction, and there's multiple times where we need to have a better discussion. So, with these requests, along with the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking and the notice of rulemaking, they're all on Federal Register. So you can go and read these at any time. None of this is a trap, everybody. The next step is the proposed rule. This is where OSHA proposes a new rule or change to an existing rule. It outlines the purpose of the new rule or changes. And again, the same thing happens. Stakeholders, consultants, advisory committees all have opportunity for communication and meetings. After that is over, the notice for proposed rulemaking is published again to the public on the Federal Register. Again, at this time, OSHA conducts another piece of information gathering, including with the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act meetings. This process allows small business employers to let OSHA know how the proposed rule will affect their businesses. I want you to think about extreme weather, extreme heat, lightning, and that we have covered on the news that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is considering this one of our biggest X factors to being reliable jobs when it comes to consistent hours. So I want you to consider a construction company that has an employee that makes $15 an hour. And this is their sustaining wage because by midweek, an understaffed small construction company, this employee knows overtime is in sight. And that's how they're able to afford that new vehicle, that smartphone data package, and enjoy, that short weekend they have before they got to get back to work after that 50-hour work week. But now we have a new proposed heat rule, and suddenly 7 hours is all we can get in before it's too hot and dangerous. Therefore, now this job takes longer. There's more commutes, there's more cost, and a higher degree of risk. All of it goes into consideration on, can we work with the known risk safely? So I believe it's important to understand that OSHA holds public hearings that are scheduled on the Federal Register with detailed information on how to participate, including instructions for submitting notice for anyone who wishes to have their comments heard and ask questions. On the newscast, we've talked about public notices and public comments often, and we will continue. The next stage is the final rule development. And this is the stage where OSHA analyzes the rulemaking record and leads to a rule, including all of our comments and other information the agency has collected to develop the final rules, including the explanation of the rule and the requirements, including how OSHA will support it and the decisions from OSHA's response from public comments on the new rule. Finally, it lists the date the rule will become effective and employers will need to comply. All of this is publicized, and we talk about every one of these new rules at the newscast as they come out, but you can also see this on social media with great construction companies, everybody who's advocating and promoting safety and best practices. I always give a shout out to Dave and everybody at the Minnesota Safety Council. That's where I went up and got my OSHA instructors education, but there's fantastic authorities out there that are promoting this day in and day out. OSHA spends a lot of money to perform outreach activities to help the public understand rules, including calls to action, how-to guides, not only in English, but Spanish, and sometimes even in other languages. The goal is to help the public understand the rule and why it was created. As I've said with the Minnesota Safety Council and Northern Illinois University, I'm an authorized 1926 trainer. And I believe in this process with my whole heart, and all of my fingers are relatively good back, and understanding that the reason we talk about falls, struck by, caught in between, electrocution, confined spaces, trench safety, and the hierarchy of controls for all safety conditions is because of what the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has done to get us there. Yes, there's enforcement officers, no different than we have police officers on the highways and near schools to keep us safe. But OSHA also has consultants and education experts and grants for safety programs to prevent us from needing to meet that enforcement officer. I want you to think about the importance of this agency and its regulatory ability. It's not to cost us more money. It's to ensure that we stay safe and smart. Go out, be safe, get your public comments in, understand what's coming. It's not this blind side. It's there. We just need to be paying attention. For this week feature and news, we're going to start with the end of June. A lot happened in the end of June. And at the same time, on June 27th, there was a publishing from science.org titled Ephemeral Stream Water Contributes to the United States Drainage Networks. Yeah, we're talking about riverbeds and dry areas and all of these aspects that impact our water cycle. And even the NGWA on July 1st, as they did their comments to the PCAST, and we're going to talk about that soon, talk about One Water and the importance of protecting all this water. There's a big deal in the state of Illinois when it came to setbacks for geothermal and the impact that Chicago doesn't use the aquifer under the city. There's no wellhead protection. But what if one day we need it? So the same as one day, what if these ephemeral streams are more important than they are right now? The EPA defines an ephemeral stream as a stream that has a flowing water only during and for a short duration after precipitation events in a typical year. These ephemeral stream beds are located above the water table year-round. Groundwater is not a source of water for these streams. Their source is runoff from rain. And that's what creates the stream flow. I want you to think about this with the excessive flooding, the dam break, the snowpack, everything that's happening in the Western US, and the ground being hardened and not being able to get that absorption, how important this is. And if you think about last year, May 25th, 2023, the Supreme Court issued the decision on the case of Sackett versus the EPA. Yes, we're right back there because I'll tell you what, Priest Lake, Idaho has driven a ton of this for us. This case was 7 years in the works. It was all because Michael and Chantel Sackett purchased property near Priest Lake, and they began backfilling the lot with dirt to prepare for building their home on this lake. The EPA stepped in and informed the Sacketts that their property contained wetlands and that their backfilling violated the Clean Water Act, which prohibits discharging pollutants into the waters of the United States. I want you to think about the drought. I want you to think about the riverbeds. I want you to think about all of these pieces and how this decision came. If you remember, and I've spoke about this many times, in that decision, Justice Alito displaced Justice Scalia, the late justice, the idea of what the water of the United States was and the connection between wetlands and how they do not connect at surface to another body that they're not part of this federally protected water. And as we think about this, at the end of June, with science.org's paper titled Federal Stream Water Contributes to the United States Drainage Networks, which establishes federal streams flow when we have massive rain events and precipitation. And they follow these landscape features, which they modeled. The stream water contributed to the United States network of more than 20 million rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, finding that ephemeral streams contribute, on average, 55% of the discharge exported from those regions. This is a big deal because the USGS has been talking about the conductivity and the substantial pathways of all of these pieces and how the water and associated nutrients, along with the pollution, may enter into these drainage networks and influence water quality. This came out at the same time as we saw a repeal of the Chevron doctrine and the implications of SCOTUS versus the EPA on the Clean Water Act. And I want you to think about Justice Kavanaugh stating this is going to leave rivers, streams, bodies of water, reservoirs unprotected. And here we are a year later. We talked about this on episode 64 of the Driller Newscast titled Clean Water Act and Chevron Doctrine. We discussed the implications. And again, the Chevron Doctrine holds federal courts must defer to the executive branch agencies who can interpret of a statute when issuing a rule, provided that the interpretation is reasonable. That's the basic. And this has worked pretty damn well for 40 years because Congress has so many complexities and bills and a country to run and continue to operate. So this was in place so Congress could delegate its legislative powers to executive branch agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Health and Safety Agency, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. 40 years ago, when the Chevron deference started, this was versus the Natural Resource Defense Council. It had two tests to the Chevron deference. First, we question whether Congress has directly spoken to the precise issue, and if the intent of Congress is clear that the end of the matter for the court, as well as the agency, must give us fact to the unambiguously expressed intent of Congress. Second, if the court determines Congress has directly addressed the precise question at issue, the court does not simply impose its own construction on the statute. Rather, it stays silent or ambiguous with respect to the specific issues of the question for the court. That's a lot, right? You know, this is only permissible. So, with all of that legal speak, this is what I want you to think about. Basically, the Chevron doctrine requires the court to evaluate whether a law was defined or not. And if not, the court must proceed to step 2, where it requires the expert agencies such as the EPA, Federal Food and Drug Administration, OSHA, to help define it. But that creates a lot of red tape and increased expenses for major industries. And that's the red tape that we've been talking about and how these interpretations have happened. And here we are, radicalized on this. So we've spent 40 years basing our interpretations on these regulatory agencies doing what's right for the people and the environment. The Chevron doctrine has issued and been used in over 7,000 cases. So I want you to consider the impact we've had this year in fast tracking projects. The definition of waters of the United States are navigable waters. Ephemeral stream, a majority of the time, it's just a ditch. It can't accommodate a boat, making it navigable. Remember, a year ago, Supreme Court Justice Alito alluded to wetlands and mud puddles, both containing water, but not being regulated the same. So here we are, full circle. What do we do with an ephemeral stream that falls into this 55% contribution, as we saw in the sciencenews.org piece, the science.org piece, where they state 1 out of 3 Americans get their drinking water from rivers and streams that the Clean Water Act is in charge of protecting from pollution. However, if pollutants are up to interpretation and how they got there, the same as just trying to fill in those wetlands so we can build that beautiful lake house. How is that project regulated versus that mining project, that major industry piece that's going to have quite a bit of runoff that we can't determine how this is going to work out? Because again, these ephemeral streams account for the impact of 20 million rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, and 55% of that water. Let's think about Idaho, Priest Lake. I want you to think about New Mexico versus Texas. We're going to talk about next. Let's talk about the Colorado River Compact. Let's think about the Ogallala. I want you to think about our massive rain events that are no longer 100-year storms. And where do we move from here when a riverbed that is inactive becomes active again with that significant rain and snow melt? We have to be able to protect our entire one water system. And at the same time as this is happening, we have the case of Texas versus New Mexico and the Rio Grande, which was a 5-4 decision. And it left a lot of discussion to be had because Texas was suing New Mexico for over pumping of groundwater. And if you're crazy like me and you read that 48-page opinion and dissent, you can see how this could have went either way, and how we've seen many with Justice Jackson leading the majority opinion, along with Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Roberts. If you're playing at home the Supreme Court decision Jeopardy game, they don't usually side on one side together. The opinion closed with this. Our decision today follows directly from our prior recognition of the United States District's federal interest in the Rio Grande Compact, having acknowledged those interests and having allowed the United States to intervene to assert them. We cannot allow Texas and New Mexico to leave the United States up the river without a paddle. because the consent decree would dispose of the United States compact claims without its consent. And the United States exception is sustained, and the state's motion to enter the decree is denied. It is so ordered. It's a lot of pieces there, no different than the Colorado River Compact, which has 7 states. We're looking at Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. And because of that, the dissent led by Justice Gorsuch states, looking beyond this case to the future, one does not brighten the prospect when the federal government sought to enter the case it did without Texas having any objection and consideration, which carried a lot of weight. But in light of the veto power, the court seemingly awards the government over the settlement of an original action which the state in its right mind wouldn't object to government intervention in future water rights cases. If, as this has happened here, when heavily caveated permission to intervene may end up federalizing an interstate dispute, what state would ever want to risk letting the nose make it under the tent in that way to fear the majority's short-sighted decision will only make it harder to secure the kind of cooperation between the federal and state authorities, the reclamation, which envisions, law over many river systems. With respect, I dissent. If we think about Navajo Nation versus the United States and Arizona last year, in the oral argument, there was the discussion that there's pumpable groundwater. And if you look at the oral arguments to this that happened in March, Texas versus New Mexico was based on New Mexico over pumping groundwater. And Gorsuch even goes on in his discussion to talk about the impacts to New Mexico and all of the pieces that continue to be what's going to happen here. And he called the consent decree between Texas and New Mexico that didn't work with the United States on as perfectly suited for 2 states. However, how we got to a majority opinion was the fact that there's 66,000 acre feet of the Rio Grande compact that is promised to not to New Mexico, to Mexico, with a caveat that every 4 to 5 years, 1.75 million acre feet will be returned. At the same time, let's not forget, we've talked about this, Colorado River Compact allocates 1.5 million acre feet yearly to Mexico. We have not been meeting those demands, and Mexico has not been meeting their requirements of 1.75 every 4 to 5 years. Most recently reported by Reuters in May that stated that Mexico has only sent 30% of what it has promised in 2024. So we got groundwater being impacted all over the place in the construction industry. And it's all coming from extreme weather and extreme heat. And the new normal is these excessively hot, longer summers. The heat dome in Mexico, I want you to look at what's happening in New Mexico, in Arizona, and Texas, across the country. Mexico is heading towards a day zero water rationing situation. what will that do to individuals going through Mexico City to our border and the water that is required? Again, if you remember, the solution for the sovereign nation of the Navajo people was to use groundwater. Yet, on this discussion, we're holding up allocations of 66,000 acre feet of Rio Grande water. Why? Because we got citrus farmers in southern Texas, and we have sugarcane in Texas and Mexico that are severely being impacted right now by these droughts. So the discussions that we need to be having as we go into the Jubilee and then into the year end. And I love the fact that we saw National Groundwater Association make comments on the PCAST that we covered in the news. And that's the leadership and the beauty of all those great individuals working together, and why I'm proud to be a National Groundwater Association member. But if we're looking at right now what's happening with the executive branch and appointed agencies to help research, educate, listen to us, public comments, and regulate, we can't cut their feet out from under them. The conclusion, and Jesse Richardson said this the best several times on the newscast, was, okay, Congress needs to make laws, and these laws have to be followed. Right now, we're in this unambiguous to ambiguous, and we have agencies trying to interpret, doing calls to action. Do you think the waters of the United States that happened last year and in 2022, all of those roundtables and YouTube videos that you can go watch with the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA was just to inflate everybody's egos? No, it was because this is the policy making that's happening. And as we go into November, I want you to think about the regulations that are important to you and the people we need to trust in these agencies, in our local government, our state government, and our national government. And again, I'm not talking about presidents here. I'm talking about the real men and women and individuals working in Congress and in these agencies that care nothing more than to continue our great country moving forward. It's a lot to think about, everybody. Thank you for joining us for episode 118. We need to understand the impact of these agencies and what they're doing to protect people and the environment. These are topics that have to be at the top of our head in discussions. In the drilling industry, we discover the unknown. That unknown has to be protected. It's a vast resource that we have to continue to consider all implications, from how we discover that unknown to how we preserve it. Check out thedriller.com for the latest content. And thank you again, Center Rock Inc. We appreciate you helping us bring the news this week. And as always, helping us lucky drillers using your product to make those dang rocks disappear. Thanks, everybody.